Hey everyone, and welcome back in. It's good to see you. Well, of course, in the last episode, we used a little artificial intelligence, specifically ChatGPT, to create basically a narrative or a story of kind of the layout of this scene here. And from that, we have our T34 and a farmer that's going to be in this field here, tending his crops post-war. Well, in this episode, a lot of old-fashioned modeling. We have a base to put together here, and we also need to paint out our figure, our Nicolai the Farmer fellow here. Oh goodness, decisions. What should we work on first? Well, let's flip a coin. Heads, it's Nickolai. Tails, it's the base. Well, heads it is, and so we're going to start off with Nickolai. We'll do some figure painting to start off with. Well, this is a master box set, civilians, and it has this wonderful farmer. It's like one of the only farmers I could find, at least on the short notice that I was working on here. Sprue's a little bit warped, doesn't quite fit in the box apparently, but that's okay. We're going to cut it off the sprues, the parts off the sprues, and we'll glue him together and we'll get started. So now let's get on to the painting, and I'm going to follow the same sort of ideas, the same techniques that I've been kind of exploring and developing over the last couple of projects. I've base painted everything in white, and now I'm going to come back in with just some real light washes, and the color is going to be magenta. I've decided I like this color, at least for the time being. Just real light washes here. We'll do a couple, 3 washes, just allowing the paints to settle into the crevices and the recesses of the figure. Now I'm changing up the process just a little bit here. I've been playing around with inks. Now these are acrylic inks, and this is burnt umber. It's a real dark brown color. I'm going to give everything just a real quick wash now. This ink is already very, very thin, very translucent almost. But just a quick wash of this really settles into the recesses and helps deepen these shadows. After those washes, I set it aside for just a little while, just to allow everything to dry. Now I can start painting again and bringing out basically the skin tones and the highlights and really doing the facial features on this. And again, I have this nice roadmap here now. I've got these deep shadows created, especially from that wash of the ink, the burnt umber ink. And then I've got this nice glaze over the top of that with the magenta. And I've still got the highlights showing through with the whites and such. So now that roadmap is there as we talk about, and I can just start bringing out the features. Well, Nicolai's head is coming together nicely now. We're able to start putting together his cap onto it now, kind of doing the finishing touches on him, getting the hair kind of in place and such, working on that mustache just a little bit, just those little final details there, and we'll continue to work on those as we move along and put them all together. But now I think it's time we can go ahead and start moving around and work on the rest of his torso. I'm going to follow the same process as I did with the skin tones on the clothing. Basically have that white background or the white base layer, and then just washes of his clothing colors, just slowly but surely building up those color bases. The colors naturally accumulate into the crevices and recesses, causing deeper shadows. And then we can come back in as a secondary step and start adding the highlights along the top edges and those areas of sunlight and such, and then finally, we can come in and add in some of those finer details, such as like belts and collars and things like that. after a little while, we finally get to that point where I can start putting everything together. We can put Nicolai's head into its proper location, just a drop of glue there. Kind of press down gently, making sure the alignment looks nice. And I think we've got Nickolai pretty much ready to go, and we could start moving on to, yes, the base. A special thank you to all my amazing Patreon members for your incredible support. Your contributions help me continue to create content for this channel. If you're not already a member, I invite you to join our Patreon community. As a member, you'll gain access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, early releases, and more. I hope you'll consider joining Patreon and supporting this channel. Thank you very much. As we recall from our narrative, the basic scene layout here is, this of pasture, a field, the steppes of Russia. It's post-war. There's this abandoned or knocked out T34 that's here in the field, 1946. And Nicolai's out there just doing his best to start regaining and reclaiming his croplands. So first thing I want to do here is size out the base, of course, and I do that, as I always do, just kind of with straight edges and rulers and an eyeball and trying to make the base as kind of as compact as I can. But in this case, I actually wanted to emphasize the grander scape, the broader horizons, that this is a large expanse. So I've given it a little bit more room, especially on the front side here where Nickolai is going to be, so kind of give that sense of space. The area where the T34 is going to set, well, that added a little bit of extra foam there. This way I can kind of drop it back in there. Again, this tank has been knocked out for a period of time, so it's settled into the earth a little bit. Some of the earth is blown up around it. So I want it to look like it's naturally set in place a bit. And now we can go ahead and add our landscape. And for this, yes, I'm using Sculpey again, just kind of pressing that in and around all these different foam elements to build up the lay of the land, as you will. Of course, the next thing I want to do is get the T34 really locked into place there. So while the Sculpey is still soft, just lay down some plastic wrap there so everything stays nice and clean. Press it into place. Now I have my indentations, my markings there. Get everything all nice and looking naturally locked in. Pressing a little bit of the extra Sculpey around some of those road wheels just really helps make it a little bit more convincing. Now it's time to plant our crops, and for that we're going to make some rows and furrows. I guess that's what you call it in the agricultural world. Basically the rows are where the plants, the crops are being planted on, and the furrows are that space in between, the low parts. And I'm just rolling out some basically snakes or cylinders of the Sculpey and laying those into the crops, the crop rows, pressing those into place, kind of making sure everything blends together. Some of you have asked in the past what type of Sculpey this is, and this is an air dry Sculpey, so basically it just takes however long it takes to dry. So when I do this type of work on my bases, what I try to do is do it sort of towards the end of my work session, like at the end of the day, let it alone overnight, and then I can come back in the next morning and I'm ready to start again. Now this will all look very familiar if you've followed in my previous videos. We're going to be using the AK Terrains, this acrylic paste, basically to lay the foundational color here. The color's great, this dark brown color. It also has some grit to it or some texture within. And then I'm going to lighten it up and get a little bit here, add just some, some interest to it. Using dry earth, we'll kind of mix these two tones together, get some sort of a mid-brown color when we finally get done here. I'm using water to thin this out so it just spreads nicely. I'm not worried about trying to build up any bulk here. I'm just really basically just trying to paint the base, if you will. These highlights on the top of the rows is still the dry earth. It's just highly, highly thin. I'm just literally just dipping my brush into some water and into the dry earth. It's just right down there next to me here. A little bit off camera, and just taking a little bit of that color, a little bit of the paint color from that, and just hitting the tops of those rows. After a little bit of back and forth, I've got a base color that I'm happy with here. It's got some nice color to it. It's got some nice contrast. The rows kind of pop out a little bit. There's some bright spots there. Now it's time to bring in the T34 and lock it in permanently into place. Around the road wheels, any of those small gaps that are left, I'm just going ahead and use the AK Terrain's texture, just kind of press that into any of those spaces, build up the earthworks just a little bit. Again, this is a heavy vehicle. It's been here for a couple of years. It's settled into the landscape a bit. The dirt has kind of wind blown up around it somewhat. So just making sure all those gaps are filled up and making sure this T34 is very well integrated within this scene. And while doing this, I vary the coloring between the dark earth and the dry ground. And this just adds that sense of dry mud and wet mud and adds some more visual interest to the scene. And you may have noticed I'm being a little bit careful here to really not get it onto the road wheels, because I still want to be able to, at this stage, pull the T34 off as I finish up the base. And at this stage, I still can do that and then apply it permanently a little bit later on. Okay, now it's time to plant our crops here. And for this, I'm just using 6mm grass tufts. This is a very nondescript, very generic. I'm not trying to simulate any type of crop in particular here. It's just a crop. Adding these different colors of 6mm tufts, and then coming back over the top with a very highly thinned, diluted olive green color just to kind of unify the color a bit here. And now I can add my T34 probably for the last time here. If I'm happy with this, we'll lock it into place. We'll just put a few drops of glue in there. And now it's time to start setting the scene and doing the final touches. This is my stash of leftover photo etch from all sorts of projects from all sorts of years. I'm just going to find some scraps in here and just basically add to the clutter of this destroyed T34. Well, now I have a nice pile of shiny brass parts, but unfortunately that's the last thing I want, is a bunch of shiny brass parts on my scene here. So let's take care of that. I'm going to pour some of the metal burnishing fluid into this little jar. We'll take our shiny brass parts, we'll drop those into the jar, and we'll take care of this. We'll dull up these finishes on this, and we'll go from there. What is it? Shaken, not stirred? Is that the way Bond likes them? I can't quite remember. But after a few shakes and or stirs in just about 30 seconds, we have our parts. They're all dulled to some sort of a basically a dark brown black color here, which is perfect for our scene. No shininess showing through at all. The parts sit on a paper towel for just a little while just to wick off some of the excess fluid, and then in that same jar, and now replace it with some soapy water. We'll take those parts, drop them back into the soapy water this time, give it another shake and or stir. I gotta look up that recipe. Pull the parts out, and now we're ready to add just maybe a little bit of paint. The parts as they come out of the burnishing fluid, they actually look great. They have this nice dark iron color that's perfect for the scene. Put them on basically as they are, but we'll add a little bit of patina to them, some rusting here and there. Just give them quick washes of the oranges and the reds and the yellow colors. Once those dry, then it's just a matter of kind of what looks pleasing, what looks like a well put together, destructed scene, if that makes sense. So one final idea I had here was this T34, of course, it's been here for some years, and Nickolai, well, he's done his best to work around this thing. It's sitting in the middle of his field. He's worked around it. He's worked up to it. But of course, where the T34 sits, it's been there for a few years. There's been some shrubbery and underbrush that's kind of grown up around it that, you know, in Nicolai's work, he hasn't touched it. So I've putting together some wildflowers, some little bit taller grasses here, just kind of tucking them in around the base here, just to give it a sense of a little bit more aging. And then finally, adding a few extra details here, darkening up some of the weld beads here and there using one of the AK weathering pencils. Super simple. And there we are. We're at the conclusion of this series and this episode. So let's kind of do a little bit of a back up here. So we started this out looking at ChatGPT, and that gave us the narrative of this. And yes, I've got a lot of mixed comments, and that's great, because that's the whole idea here, was I wanted to create some sort of a discussion. And yes, you're right, those who say that, well, it was my ideas, my prompts, so this would have happened anyway. Yeah, you're probably right, but the narrative kind of flushed out the idea, and that's what I followed throughout the scene here. Is it a crutch? Not really. Is it going to destroy modeling? Probably not, because I still had to do all of this with my hands no matter what ChatGPT had to say about it. But in the end, I think AI is going to be with us, and it's going to be a tool that we should come to grips with to some degree or another. In the meantime, this scene, I think it came together nicely. It's a very simple scene. It only took 2 episodes, of course, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it and you enjoy this channel, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. Of course, I do have a Patreon page if you'd like to support this channel further. The link for that is in the description below. And that brings us to, like I say, the conclusion of this episode, and we'll be back with something different next time. So until then, everybody, take care and happy modeling.